Okay, so I'm going to work through, this is problem, what problem is this? Problem 16 in homework 7. So you're given that tangent is negative 3/4, and you're told that it's in the second quadrant. That's what this says right here. So I'll put a little second quadrant up here. The second quadrant is what tells me that it's negative. That's why tangent's negative, because it's in the second quadrant. So I'm going to ignore the negative for a moment and just draw a triangle that represents the 3 and the 4. We know that tangent is opposite of hypotenuse, so that means this would be 3 and that would be 4. And then if we use Pythagorean theorem, we know that 4 squared plus 3 squared should be equal to the hypotenuse squared. And of course 4 squared is 16, 3 squared is 9, so that would be 25 is equal to hypotenuse squared, so that would make the hypotenuse 5. So now once we have that, we know we can find any value for x. We know that cosine of x is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, which would be 4/5. And because it's in the second quadrant, I know that it has to be a negative 4/5. If sine x would be 3/5, and again, since we're in the second quadrant, sine is positive there, so I'll leave it positive. Tangent, we already know, is negative 3/4, which makes, you can see that, 3/4, it's in the second quadrant, it's negative. So I can find any trig value I want. I can find secant, cosecant, etc. So now I'm going to go back down here to the actual question. They asked me to find what sine of x over 2 is. Well, I immediately go to my trig identity help sheet, and I know that sine of x over 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine x over 2. That's from the trig identity sheet. Okay, now the plus or minus doesn't mean that there's two answers. It means that the formula does not know whether it's plus or minus. It depends on you figuring that out. So how do we figure that out? Well, first of all, we know that x is in the second quadrant. But in this case, we're dealing with sine of x over 2. So we're actually dealing with an angle that's half of x. So if you take an angle that's in the second quadrant and cut it in half, where does that put you? So let me grab some colors here. So right now, we're in the second quadrant. We don't know what the angle is, but it's between these two lines. Okay? So if you divide this angle right here in half, half of 180, let's say, would be, let me grab a different color here. Half of 180 would be 90, so that would put you right here. So the biggest angle in the second quadrant, if you cut it in half, is right on the edge of the first and second quadrant. Likewise, if I take the 90-degree angle and cut it in half, that would put me at 45 degrees. So if I cut any angle in the yellow in half, I'll end up in the blue. So if x is in the second quadrant, that means that x over 2 would be in the first quadrant. So that tells me this thing has to be positive, because in the first quadrant everything's positive. Okay, so now I know it's positive. So then I'm just going to go through and plug in the numbers I know. I know that 1 is, of course, 1. Cosine x, I go over here, and we actually already found that, so that's nice. Cosine x is negative 4/5. So that would be a negative 4/5. And then on the bottom, of course, 2 is just 2. So then I just have to simplify that. So that would be the square root of 1 plus 4/5, because minus and negative is plus, over 2. And how do you simplify a complex fraction? You, well, in this case, I would probably just divide by 2, which would be multiplied by 1/2. So I end up with the square root of 1/2 times 1 is 1/2. 1/2 times 4/5 would be 2/5. And we add those two together and we get, oh wait, we got to get a common denominator. So multiply top and bottom of this by 5, I'd have 5/10. Multiply top and bottom of this by 2, I get 4/10. So I end up with 9/10 square root. Of course, the square root of 9 would be 3, so this would be 3 over the square root of 10. Okay, so hopefully that'll get you going. Of course, cosine of x over 2 will work similar. You'll just plug into whatever formula goes with that. This one is, if I remember right, it's actually the square root of 1 plus cosine x when I'm doing cosine, and then there's a formula for tangent of x over 2 also. So in all those cases, you'll just set up the equation, figure out whether it's plus or minus by, in this case, it's all going to be positive because it's in the first quadrant. Everything's positive in the first quadrant. And then you make a substitution based on the triangle over here, and then just simplify. Okay. Let me know if that helps.